Okay, welcome again, everyone, to our latest webinar from Axiomatics. Today, our topic is modern web application security for cloud-first initiatives. Today, we're co-hosting this webinar with our partner, IDF Connect. And just before we get going with the content, we have the usual housekeeping items. You are being muted centrally, so we have good sound quality for the recording. That recording will be available soon after the event today, so you can share it with colleagues or watch it again later. And as usual, we will have some time for questions and answers. And you can, as you come up with questions, put them in the GoToWebinar Q&A box. All right, so my name is Gerry Gebel. I'm your co-host today with Axiomatics, and I'm joined by Richard Sand from IDF Connect. Richard and I have known each other for many, many years, and Richard goes back to one of those anchor companies in the identity and access management business, Netegrity. Richard, welcome to the webinar today. Great to have you on board.
Thank you very much, Gerry. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so we'll hear more from you in a few moments, but yeah, so today our topic is web application security. And we have a few points to share that we want to cover with you over the next 45 minutes or so. And so the topic today is around web access management, or WAM, as it's commonly referred to. So this remains an important capability for many organizations, maybe even more important than ever, as so many enterprises are moving toward the cloud. They want to move workloads to the cloud, have a cloud first initiative, or expect to have a hybrid on-premise and cloud deployment models going forward. So this has definitely changed the requirements for single sign-on and for web access management over time. And what we're going to talk about today is how the combination of Axiomatics and IDF Connect can meet these newer cloud-based requirements for web access management, and give you some advantages and some alternatives to some of the legacy web access management tools that are out there today. And Richard, with any luck, the demo gods will be on our side, and the demonstration will work as well. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
You got it.
All right, so Richard, before I hand over to you, I'll just give a very, very brief level set about Axiomatics for those that are not as familiar. Maybe this is your first webinar with us. So our focus as a software company is all about protecting sensitive information. And we do that with a technique referred to as dynamic authorization. So this is a process where you define your access policies and rules for who can see what kind of data or other digital asset. And at runtime, we make a determination, is this access permitted or denied? And this is applicable for lots of different kinds of resources. You often hear us on webinars and other presentations talk about securing APIs, microservices, various kinds of data systems. Today, the focus is on applications, and in particular, web applications. And this dynamic authorization topic or technique is also based on a framework or a standard called attribute-based access control, or ABAC. And what's special about ABAC is that it allows for almost any kind of input into the access evaluation equation, not just who you are, but what kind of device you're using. Is there a time of day issue here? Is it location dependent? What's your relationship to the data? And so on, excuse me. So it's all of these attributes that are inputs to a policy evaluation. And the policy is really the logic that binds or glues together all of these different attributes to give you the combinations that either allow or deny access to a resource. So that's the basics for dynamic authorization and ABAC. And then from an architecture perspective, this is the highest level or the simplest view of an access management architecture. And it's also applicable to the web access management kind of products that have been on the market for many years now, going back even into the mid to late 90s. So you have an application, in this case, a web application, and some kind of enforcement point in front of that app. In the web access management case, it would either be a web agent of some sort or a proxy in front of those web applications. And then that would broker the authentication process and the access control back to a policy engine or some kind of authorization engine where those policies have been defined for that particular set of web resources. One of the different things about the ABAC model from Axiomatics is that you can connect to almost any kind of additional attribute source if you need to look up more information about the user or about the resource that's being protected. So this is a generic architecture for authorization services built on industry standards. We talk about XACML and REST and JSON, LDAP, Java, and so on, easily extended with third-party products. We've done several webinars, for example, where the enforcement point is an API gateway. And the REST and JSON APIs of the authorization engine make it super simple to do that kind of integration. Today, of course, the enforcement point is all about IDF Connect and SSO REST, which Richard will be telling us about. So, so that's the basics for today. And the other aspect of the system that makes it more modern and flexible is that the authorization engine, the IDF Connect components can all be containerized and deployed and managed in a more cloud native way. So we think that's a key aspect as well. So Richard, that's a brief intro on the Axiomatics side. Why don't you tell us about IDF Connect and what you're up to?
We'd love to. Thanks, Gerry. So as Gerry stated, my name is Richard Sand. I'm from IDF Connect, and we are a company that specializes in all things around web access management. And the discipline of web access management is one that has been around for a while, and Integrity back in the 90s sort of launched one of the foundational products in that space, giving the capability to look at web traffic coming into a site, look at the HTTP layer, and make access decisions as to whether or not the user should be able to come into the site, and if they're going to log in, how they log in, and what they're allowed to see, what their profile is, which resources within the app they're allowed to see. And that's, very, very simply is what access management is about. Now, the relationship with Axiomatics helps us, get further into the access management model, where you have a very rich capability to have a variety of access expressions for your apps. So IDF Connect created a product called SSO REST, and SSO REST is our flagship product. And it is a ground up sort of re-envisioning of what web access management is. And the word web is sort of a broad term. We're talking about anything that happens at the HTTP level or even the WebSockets level, where you could be talking about web applications, web services or microservices, or mobile apps. A lot of different uses of what web is. So you have sort of traditional products and vendors in the web access management space very venerable ones like, CASSO, formerly known as SiteMinder, Oracle Access, Tivoli, Security Access Manager, the old Sun AM is now OpenAM. So these are the traditional products that sort of have defined this space. Our vision was to create a modern implementation of access management that was fully cloud ready, that solves specific problems that we're going to dive into shortly, about why access management is difficult and has been problematic in cloud and cloud hybrid architectures, and has all the modern capabilities that we expect from modern software, like the ability to be containerized and having orchestration capabilities and metrics and dashboards and all of the good things that we've grown to expect and demand from modern infrastructure. So we're going to start with the concept of zero trust. And zero trust is a buzzword. It's become popular in the past couple years, as buzzwords tend to do. But zero trust has different meanings for different contexts, and different vendors will use zero trust in ways that speak to their space. So when we talk about zero trust in the world of access management, we're really talking, it boils down to one single principle, and that is that every single request needs to be vetted before it's allowed to touch your application. And that, it sounds simple, and yet it's a discipline that's really been hard to achieve in a cloud world because of the variety, the vast distribution of the applications and latency and connectivity and all these good things that that have prevented traditional access managers from being able to run. So the SSRest product solves the problems by creating a very comprehensive set of web services that can handle all of the types of inquiries that an access management system needs to do. A web access management system. So in this diagram here, this is sort of just a very simple expression of what a the application architecture might look like. Axiomatics Policy Server, down in the right-hand corner, is a policy decision engine, and it has the ability to handle evaluation criteria for a wide variety of different types of requests, whether they're applications or database access or access to files or documents. There's a really rich access expression capability. What the SSRest gateway then does is it takes that richness and applies it to the world of web applications or HTTP-based applications. So there are three ways that the SSRS product is typically used. There are use cases where, and you may be using any one or all three of them combined, but it basically boils down to server-side integration, or I should say application runtime integration. That means communicating from an app that's residing on a platform. I don't even want to call it a server because, if you're writing an app and publishing it to a platform service, there's no server that, you can touch or put your hands on. That's the nature of, platform services. you get a container, you publish your app, you go. So we need to change the notion of what is a server. We're no longer, worried about protecting servers. We're worried about protecting apps wherever they may be. So your app might need to interrogate, an access management system. Your app may need to make a query as to whether John Smith is allowed to access the manager resource. Your application may challenge a user for authentication. You may need to do a step-up authentication under circumstances if a user is doing a sensitive transaction. They logged in with their normal mechanism, but then they are about to buy something or do something sensitive, and you step up to two-factor. These are all things that your application might be doing programmatically. And so the top arrow shows the application being able to interface with the gateway and understand about your user and the user's session across all of your different applications. And the key point about this type of interface is that there's no SDK, there's no library you need to install. All of the services are these REST-based services that are really, really trivial to access. Now I'm going to jump to the bottom arrow where it shows, a browser, or this might be a mobile device or some sort of thick client, but the end user's device can also interact with the SSRS gateway. And this is very important for modern applications, for rich browser applications, AJAX or HTML5, where the user, it's not the old model of application where the user clicks a web page, sees the web page, fills out a form, clicks submit, or clicks a link. Now the user is always staying within the framework of your application, and that's where the term single page applications come into play. So these interactions are to allow the same sort of behaviors as you would expect, where the user never leaves the confines of your application. If I launch my mobile app and I'm doing things on the mobile app, your mobile app doesn't want the user sent away to a login form. You want to keep control of the user experience. And it sounds simple, but it's amazing how many access management products fall down at this point, where the traditional products were designed for, traditional HTML style applications where you click a link or fill out a form and the user keeps navigating from page to page. So there are programmatic ways to do access management, both from the server side of an application and from the client side. But there's a third capability, and this is probably the most important. And that's what we show in the middle, which is the ability to drop right in the center of the diagram where it says SSRS plugin. This is the ability to have turnkey security with your application, where there's no API at all. There's no programmatic prompting for a login or programmatic checking a user's roles. That the security enforcement is actually done before the application logic gets invoked. Now, in a traditional access manager, you'll see this a lot where, there's a web server that's set up as a reverse proxy, or there's a CA called them web agents, Oracle calls them web gates, IBM calls them web seals. These pieces of software that you would install onto a web server or app server, run the installer, click next, fill up parameters. Again, that's an old model, and it breaks down when you're doing modern apps. You're putting apps in different locations. The notion of a data center no longer is applicable, and there's not even a server. You're writing an app, you're publishing it So the quandary is, how do you get that turnkey security, the assurance that every request is vetted, but do that in a cloud, hybrid, containerized world of platform as a service? So it's important to think about why are we talking about this? And I've already talked about zero trust and this notion of every request being vetted. So that's the foundational pillar of modern zero trust access management. But let's think about the traditional products. Let's think about these products that we were using 10 years ago or 15 years ago to do access management with all of our apps in our data centers. And we may all have mixed emotions about those access managers, and some people loved them and some people hated them. But it's important to remember which positive aspects these access management products and the capability of access management as a discipline gives you. So you're defining policies centrally in one spot. Your apps may be all over the world, or different data centers, or different geos, or wherever. But you at least have a central place where your security or your SecOps teams could define policies. And the ability to centrally define access policies is really very powerful and provides a lot of protection against against threats, whether they're accidental or malicious, or having the centralized capability makes it a lot easier to control your security. Similarly, having the runtime visibility, being able to actually see when a user has logged in or logged in last, being able to see an audit trail of what a user did during a given session across many applications. We use tools like Splunk and Elk to try to pull logs and messages from different apps and different platforms and different operating systems and different servers, and we try to get all these stuff together and then try to make sense of it. But in the world of a strong access manager, you've got that trail, at least of activity, right there with you. So that's the second sort of leg of the access management story, the central definition and monitoring and control. However, as we said, we're in a cloud world now, and we're in a world where we don't have web servers or app servers that are ours to touch. And even if they are sort of, these are machines owned by your IT organization, there's an expectation that, developers are containerizing, and you're automating the deployment of applications. You're following your CI/CD pipeline and pushing and publishing applications. So what good does a strong sort of centralized access manager give you in this highly distributed world? And so a modern web access manager has to have an answer for that problem. And so it means that, a highly distributed access enforcement capability, the whole notion of what a perimeter is totally changed. The perimeter isn't defined by your firewall with your router to your ISP in your data center. That's no longer, the relevant definition of your perimeter. So, we need the enforcement. We need to do what's called continuous authentication, which is, so part of this zero trust notion where, it's not enough that you just logged in once and you're in, but we need to be on alert and be vigilant about things like session hijacking or, any sort of anomalous activity that, might be happening during the life of a given session. Users suddenly accessing from a different device or a different, location, and say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. So we need to have all this power, but all that distribution as well. So when we look at access management, and we talk about single sign-on, we talk about authentication, and one of the questions that often comes up is, well, don't we already have things like protocols like SAML or OAuth or OpenID Connect? Isn't that web access management? And it's important to know when those protocols are sufficient and fit the bill, and where there are gaps. So if we define access management by these 6 different capabilities, and then you look at what a federation type of protocol gives you, any ticket or claims type of authentication capability gives you, and you realize that, okay, you may get single sign-on and you may get authentication, but you're losing all the centralized capabilities. And you're also not getting the turnkey perimeter type of access enforcement where the application is protected, automatically by product, as opposed to needing to do, security checks and security enforcement programmatically. So, and it's depending upon the nature of your applications, you may or may not decide that that's okay. But it's important to understand these gaps, and these gaps have kind of gotten wider and wider as more and more apps have been put into the cloud, and there really hasn't been a like upgrade of access management capabilities to keep up with that until SSO REST. So that's the problem statement, as I've laid it out, and we have these pillars of what modern access management should be, and the gaps that cloud and highly distributed applications introduce. So let's think about requirements. If we go back to the basics, okay, well, what do we want out of an access management system that's modern and is built for today's environments, today's organizations, today's developers, today's operations? So going through some of those requirements, right at the top, most important is cloud-first deployment. That means that your app has to be able to be deployed out to the cloud with, absolute minimal friction, minimal, if zero, operational requirement, and what we call deploy and go. You take your app, it's got the SSRS plugin in your app, and the SSRS plugins are single libraries. They're not things that you install per se. If you're doing, development and you're building your app simply declares a dependency on our plugin, and the plugin is there. The library is there as part of your application, at build time. And simply by virtue of its existence, the plugin gives you that turnkey security because it's going to be inspecting the requests coming in as they come in, and evaluating them, interacting with the SSRS gateway, and giving you your turnkey security. And our plugins, they exist for a lot of languages. We have them also for, you can still go with a reverse proxy model or a web server with a plugin. You can do those too. But the unique thing that the modern access management system demands is the ability to do that type of enforcement, but directly from the application layer. So that's the most important requirement. Moving to the left, there's support for modern applications. As I said, most traditional access managers were written, in the sort of the model view controller era of here's a web app, struts or things like that, and you clicked on a link and you went down that road. Well, now we have HTML5 and AJAX, frameworks like Spring, there's Node.js, the notion of single page applications that were challenging for the traditional access managers that were written for, in that sort of model view controller era, and need to be, easy and seamless for a modern access manager. The integration capabilities. You think back to the traditional vendors, CA, Oracle, IBM. You look at their product offerings. Clearly, these are products that are meant to be one size fits all, security for all use cases, and those vendors want you to have all of their product capabilities to do all of your security. In this day and age, there are so many different types of security providers, so many different types of companies that you're going to want to interact with. That they have, fraud protection and intrusion detection, device, DNA or device fingerprinting capabilities, lists of known usernames on the dark web. There are so many different types of services that provide additional security. Your access manager can't be a bottleneck. You can't say, well, I love your service. Yeah, that sounds great. And boy, that would save us money and save us time and save us reputation if we could use your service. But we'd have to go back and get our vendor of our access manager to go do this, and this to make it work. And we're not a big enough fish for them to listen to us. So sorry. How many times have we heard this sort of tale? So the modern access manager has to be able to be extended to all manner of third parties, like stacking Lego bricks. And, I'm a developer. As I've been working with these access management systems and doing app integrations with them, for 2 decades now. So I have a developer's sort of point of view and a lot of, sympathy, if you will, or empathy, I guess is better, for app developers and how burdensome it can be. So the requirement here is to be as app developer friendly, and that brings us to DevOps friendly, having all of the capabilities that modern web app developers expect from tools today. And lastly, down the bottom right, we want to be based on industry standards, and this is also where a lot of customers who were using the legacy access management systems are really in a bind, because the mechanisms that they use, and especially going between your enforcement points to your decision points, are always been vendor proprietary. With the SSRS approach, we break the risk of vendor lock, because everything is done with HTTP, everything is done with JSON, everything follows the REST model, and everything can be extended or written or replaced or developed using the JSON REST type of model.
And Richard, I really like the developer focus here, the developer perspective. When you and I were at the Identiverse conference a couple weeks ago, we heard many sessions or discussions where infrastructure as a microservice and being able to manage it in that manner was really an important point for enterprises. So, this is something that really stands out to me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear the same thing. So what does this actually look like when you start to use it? at the core of the modern access management solution that Axio and IDFC can bring to bear is the Axiomatics Policy Server, which is handling the actual access queries, and the SSRS Gateway, which takes the capabilities of Axiomatics and takes the capabilities of ABAC queries, takes capabilities of standards like ExactMole, and applies them to the HTTP universe. And the Gateway and APS, are both completely flexible and configurable products where, the heart of where your actual user identities are stored, whether they're in an LDAP or a database or in Azure AD or, in your data set or not in your data set. It doesn't matter where. These products are designed to be able to talk to any type of authoritative identity store. And then your apps, can be anywhere. They can be in the cloud and in different clouds. Some apps, you're going to take your .NET apps and publish them to Azure. You're going to take your Java apps, you're going to publish them to, Google App Engine or Amazon Beanstalk maybe. You may be, you have VMs running Nginx. Nginx has a new app platform called Unit for your PHP and Rails and some of these different languages. Doesn't matter. Same enforcement capability, plugins, turnkey. Developers don't have to do anything to be protected by it, and the end users get that common experience. That as they move across a variety of your applications, they get the single sign-on. It's the same session. If they need to step up, they've stepped up for all applications, and gives them, it actually gives your users, and it gives you the capability to have less friction for your users, because the more that you have good centralized controls over what's going on, the more you can rely upon sessions and keeping users signed in and not needing to have them step up or do a two-factor challenge, if there's sufficient information to know that they've already passed that challenge.
Right, and those users can be connected to any sort of IDP as well, right? Any kind of external or SaaS-based IDP.
Right, exactly. You might have your, you might have your on-prem Active Directory that's for your employees, or you might have moved everything to Azure AD, where your identities have been, put into a third-party, provider. There are IDaaS vendors out there. There are, solutions like, Workday and or pure play, identity providers like Okta that are giving you more and more capabilities to simplify your infrastructure and focus on what you want to be focused on.
Right.
But if your other tools don't play nicely and are not designed to consume those, you end up spending just as much effort on integration. And so, the Axio product and the IDF Connect product are designed not only just for developers to be easy to use, but for operations to be easy to maintain, easy to containerize, easy to deploy, easy to monitor, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, we're not trying to impose a certain architecture on you. All right.
Correct.
So Richard, we're about to try the demonstration. We've got a couple of screenshots here just as a prelude to that. So this is an example of a policy tree or policy graph from Axiomatics. And we've got a number of different kinds of policies and rules here to protect different kinds of web resources. Protected resource. This one is the second one here is for a short time to live kind of session. You've got a catch-all here to reject other kinds of requests coming in. Here's one for a forms-based app to protect that kind of app. And the one on the bottom here, I think this one you use to give headers to the downstream application from the SSO REST system, right?
That's exactly correct. You know, we're talking about web applications. The web applications all understand HTTP requests, and so headers have been the common integration point to hand off from an access manager or single sign-on system into the app. So part of the capability that we've added on to APS are the semantics for handling different kinds of HTTP data, including being able to provide headers that the applications can inspect with one line and get things like, first name, last name, email address, whatever it is your app needs, you're able to define that behavior in APS and get very granular, like this particular set of resources and this particular set of user criteria. If all these things, evaluate properly as per our policies, then we will inject these headers and tell the application this information.
Right. Okay, cool. And then, so here's a little more detail around the one particular policy. So you've got a test web is your test or demo web application.
Right.
So this one here also shows what you're using an advice statement for to submit some headers to that application. Am I right about this one?
Yes, that's exactly right. And the syntax of it ties back to the attribute connectors that you've configured in APS. So we're basically completing the end-to-end handoff of information from APS's evaluation and decisions to the application can see it and react to it without any API calls or any connections, or just it's right there in the request header.
Right. Okay, perfect. And I think we've got another one here. This one's another example of using obligations and advice. So for folks that don't know, the obligations and advice statements are a function of the XACML policy language. So along with a permit or deny decision, you can send back additional information to the application, in this case to SSO REST with different info. I think the first one here is for applications authentication types that are supported. And the bottom one is another example of that time to live session length.
That's exactly right, Gerry. So we talk about obligations and advice. So the obligations are the semantics of telling the application what it needs to do to, APS isn't just giving a yes or no answer, it's also giving instruction. And in this case, these are instructions that are automatically picked up on by the SSRS plugin to do that enforcement, before the app logic is invoked to give you that protection. And so the first one is an obligation that simply says, what type of challenge to issue to a user. And, we support all your typical authentication mechanisms. First of all, the ones that are in the HTTP language, like basic auth and certificate auth and negotiated, NTLM, IWA type of auth. But then also authentication at the application level, where, a form-based authentication or authentication based on an authentication, a ticket system like SAML or OAuth or OIDC, which are all supported out of the box, so we can consume those and get the user in the front door. And then the second part is about, sessions. Because again, we now, in a single sign-on world, in a true, strong, centralized access management world, you don't have a session for each individual app. You have one global session that's applicable regardless of which apps you're browsing to. And you have the ability to customize, the behavior of that session, identify how strong that session is so that you know when you need to do a step up, or put other controls like time to live and idle and max time to live. These are all part of the advice that basically it's called advice because it happens after the authentication and authorization has succeeded, but now it's giving instructions to SSO REST as far as how to create and maintain that session for that user.
Right, and I think that improves the user experience as well, so you're not interrupting them unnecessarily.
Exactly.
And then one more screenshot here. This is a number of attributes that, Richard, you've defined that are utilized by SSO REST. So this shows how the product in the standard is extensible, so that that is the first word of the standard after all, so that you can define these additional attributes and data types and so on for use within your application. So now, do we dare go to the demo?
Yeah, so
I know you've had trouble with your demo earlier this morning.
I'm going to show, well, we've only got 10 minutes left and we haven't had time for questions yet. So let me just show a couple of things I've already got teed up.
Okay, you have control.
Sure.
While you're doing that, I'll remind attendees that you can put questions in the Q&A box in the GoToWebinar control panel.
So what I'm going to show you real quick is so this is my idfconnect.net website, and the IDF Connect website is protected with our SSO REST gateway, and we have set up some simple applications on a variety of different platforms to basically click through and see that you get the common login experience, that you get the common access enforcement experience, that you get the customizations like headers, regardless of where your apps reside. And so to give a simple example of it, I'm going to go over to a different browser where I'm not logged in. And for example, I can go over my Google App Engine application. And so this is my app. So notice the URL. I'm not on IDF Connect Net anymore. I'm on Google App Engine. But I can log in over there. And I'm logging in I'm still on appspot.com. And here's my plugin. So this is using what's called my the servlet filter plugin, or it's a J2EE component for Java web apps, where the plugin is in line in the in the request processing to do the enforcement. So I'm still on AppSpot, but we're going to go back to IDF Connect Net, and I can go from there over to a .NET app deployed on Azure, and I'm going to get the exact same app experience. Same cookies, same enforcement. I was looking for the plugin ID. This one's not configured to send it. But the point is that this is not a ticket system. This is not a federation where you go from app 1 and get a token and then show up at app 2. And once you're there, 1 and 2 have no relationship with each other. This is a centralized session, and it's applying equally to all the different apps. And so you've got the distribution capability. I mean, you can't get further apart than Google App Engine and Azure and Java and .NET. But you've got visibility centrally. You're defining your policies centrally. Here I've popped up our Kibana dashboard that we ship out of the box with, that you can tweak and customize, but it will show you all the activity across all the apps. We have another dashboard. This was our pre-Kibana dashboard, so this is going directly against Elasticsearch, but it also allows you to see things about the system and the configuration and what the request processing lifecycle is set up for your organization. And I also want to show you the developer view. Okay, so if you go back to, I'm going to fire up my version of the deck just to reference that specific slide. If we look at the picture of the different ways to use SSO REST, and we say, okay, if you're using the plugin, if the plugin is giving you that drop, that turnkey security, you don't have to do anything. As a developer, it's declare and go. Declare and go, deploy and go. You say, hey, include this library with my app, publish, and you're done. But you're also having the use case of maybe, from the client rich application, or from within your, the core of your application that you might want to programmatically interact with the gateway. And there's no SDK, there's no libraries you need to install. Everything, so if you're familiar with the web services, you've probably seen Swagger interfaces. This is just telling you all of the different web services. And there are services that are as trivial as saying, well, how much time is in my session? And there's nothing you need to do. You just, you submit the request. If the user is logged in, they have a session cookie, and you're going to get back a number. Like in this case, I got back a -1 because I'm not logged in. I don't have a session. So there's no time to live in this session. But, where it's, to the largest extent possible, we do not, we have our services as sort of trivial as can be. And, the policy management is all done within, within APS, and, I as much as I don't want to talk about, what happens if, you try this out and you've used it for a while and you decide, well, you know what, it's a good concept, but, those Axio and IDFC people, I'm not so sure. You're not locked into a vendor proprietary way of communication, nor are you locked into a vendor proprietary way of storing and expressing your policies. That's where the standards come in. So this is designed to not try to keep you in the box.
All right, Richard, we'll invite attendees to schedule some time to go into a more in-depth demonstration. I think we've got just a couple more slides to hit here before we start the session. And also for questions, we'll ask you to bear with us and give us time to answer any questions you submitted by email. So Richard, on this slide here, it shows the different platforms and servers that are supported by the SSO REST system. So this is really a huge footprint with, of course, a lot of the most common web servers and app servers being supported already out of the box. So that's great news, great coverage there. And just to reflect here for a moment, so again, the traditional model that you talked about, everything's in the data center, pretty much hardwired together. What we're suggesting here today is that now we give you the flexibility to deploy your applications, your web resources wherever you want to, keep some in the data center, move the rest to the cloud, and the configuration and firewall friendly and cloud friendly approach that we have will accommodate that. And then you've got, Richard, here a great couple pages of items that are really, I think, really important takeaways. Where these are conditions where you should be interested in this approach, this technology. I think you've hit a few times on the needs of the modern web access management platform, and I know you're definitely focused on making sure that every request coming through is vetted and scored before it gets back into the back end of your application. And of course, Axiomatics comes into play with the fine-grained nature of the policy management approach that we take. And then also here on this slide, Richard, was your focus on the developer perspective, which I totally buy into. I think it's really important today, and with everything being DevOps, and now we like to say DevSecOps enabled, it's important to fit into that kind of implementation, development, and deployment lifecycle and attitude, frankly. And then, so we're here, we're here to continue the conversation. We hope we've sparked your interest to want to be able to do that. So just reach out to either of us, to Richard or myself or any of our colleagues, and we're happy to do a follow-up. Unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A today, so we will do that via email. But we do have another webinar coming up next month where we're talking sort of on an ancillary topic, Richard, about ABAC, OAuth, and OpenID Connect again. So that's coming up in early August. So I think, Richard, we need to wrap it up there, given our time allotment. Thank you so much for joining me on the webinar today. It's been great to do this with you. I know it's been really exciting to work with you on this effort here over the last year or so. So Richard, thank you again for attending. We'll thank our audience for joining us today as well.
Yep, thank you, Gerry. Thanks to you as well, and thanks everybody for tuning in today. And we're definitely happy to do a deeper dive and show you there are so many capabilities that Axio and IDFC's products combined can give. Very excited about those opportunities.
Awesome. All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you again on the next webinar from Axiomatics. Bye for now.